I've been gaming since the mid-90s, and even now in my 30s, I'm still enjoying video games as much as I ever have before. Since I started gaming as a young kid, I've played my fair share of hard games, and I've also always been a bit of a completionist, well before trophies were ever a thing. As a young kid in the late 90s, I remember going for all 120 stars in Super Mario 64, trying to catch all the Pokemon in Pokemon Yellow, or playing any other game in which I could find a clear path to 100% or some proxy for it. Catching all 150 Pokemon clearly isn't the same as doing everything in the game, but it was a single metric or criteria that I could use and compare against my friends. I remember my friends and I in the summers of the mid-2000s playing GTA San Andreas, each with our own console and TV, and me with a checklist from game FAQs that I printed off from the local Boys and Girls Club, going through line by line in order to get the 100%. If you have no idea what the hell I just said, let me explain. See, back in the day, before high-speed internet was just a default component of everyday life, we didn't have the internet at our fingertips at all times. A typical family might have had one computer in the house, but it was nowhere near as fast, reliable, or useful as they are today. You couldn't even talk on the phone and be on the computer at the same time, and that's not a joke, that is how we lived for years. This was also well before YouTube was a household name, so text guides really were the best resource for gamers to get tips on how to complete a long or hard game. I spent so much time looking up long text guides for my favorite games in the late 90s and early 2000s. YouTube and other social media sites have expanded the network of communication and have brought groups such as gamers from all around the world together, allowing us to share our game opinions, suggestions, tips, complaints, bugs, and accomplishments. Video guides have been tremendously helpful for gamers looking to complete long or hard games, and once a meta is identified, it's rapidly shared and discussed by the community. If the game is good and has a solid player base, that meta eventually gets refined by thousands of people playing the game from all over the world. Eventually, even for the most difficult games, dedicated players will discover a few cheese methods that any player can use to beat a boss or achieve a difficult task in a game. Some games, however, just require you to get good. There's no way around it. You have to put in the practice, you have to put in the hours in order to beat it. But I firmly believe that if my old ass can earn some of these hard trophies, then anybody can get through even their toughest games if they put in enough practice. Of course, seeking out hard games or grinding out long or even boring platinum trophies is something that only a small subset of gamers tend to care about. It's definitely a niche gaming hobby, but as someone who has been with Sony since the PlayStation 1, trophies have easily been one of my favorite additions to the Sony gaming experience. By creating a standardized system of metrics such as trophy count, completion percentage, or number of platinums, trophies are a great way for gamers to keep track of which games we played and what we've done in those games long after we stop playing them. It's also a great way to compare your gaming tastes and your skill level against your friends. I wouldn't consider myself an elite gamer, but I love that sense of accomplishment you get from suffering through a game's difficulty for days or even weeks and finally beating it. Just imagine, you're playing a hard game and you're 3 hours into a no-death speedrun.
Your palms are sweaty.
Knees weak, arms are heavy, your heart rate is jacked. You know that you're just one simple mistake away from being sent back to the beginning. It's both terrifying and exhilarating. The ding you hear from finally popping the platinum trophy is Sony's way of saying, "Hey, great job, man, you did it. Congratulations," as they gift you a nice shiny reward that will be publicly displayed on your page forever. And so with this video, I'm looking at hard platinums. These are games that require skill, luck, or a combination of both in order to get at least one trophy in the game. In this list, I did not include games that simply took a long time, such as GTA 4 or 5, Red Dead Redemption 2, Cities Skylines, or any other games that aren't exactly hard, but just require a big time commitment. I usually don't equate time commitment with difficulty, outside of a few exceptions.
This list only includes platinums that I have personally earned.
And these are just 10 games that I specifically remember struggling through as I went for the platinum. I'm well aware that there are tons of games out there that are harder than anything on this list, and I fully intend on playing many of those games eventually. Also, keep in mind that some of these platinums I earned over 10 years ago, and the things that I would have considered difficult 10 years ago are most likely not the same as what I would consider difficult today. This list is based on a combination of my memories of suffering, along with a quick review of the trophy guide to fill in the missing gaps in my memory. With that out of the way, let's get right into the list. Here are my top 10 hardest platinums I've earned since I began trophy hunting way back in 2009. Starting off at number 10 is Stardust Galaxy Warriors Stellar Climax, which I earned back in August 2018. This isn't a very well-known game. There are less than 1,000 owners on PSN profiles at the time of this video, but it's a bullet hell shoot 'em up that caught my eye on the PlayStation Store for a couple bucks, so I bought it. This was a fun game, but some of the trophies were incredibly hard. Now, much of that is due to the fact that guides for this game were few and far between, and so I didn't know all the OP strats when I tried to go for some of the harder trophies. One trophy in particular, called Unbearable, was earned for beating the single-player campaign as the Black Bear character using the Iron Man preset. Iron Man mode basically means you don't get a shield, which is what made this trophy so damn hard. Now at the time, I didn't realize there was an item you could buy in-game called the Entropy Capacitor that gives you a shield based on your distortion gauge, which makes things significantly easier. However, I specifically remember getting so frustrated trying to get this and failing so many times, and finally beating it, and the trophy not unlocking. I was honestly crushed and very mad. I tried and tried again, and beat it a second time. Same thing, no trophy. I was so mad because this was an extremely hard game, at least the way I was playing it. And the game literally tells you if you're meeting the requirements of the achievement. It tells you what in-game achievements can be earned based on your current build. I even went as far as to contact the developers through email, and to my surprise they responded. Looking back, I sounded pretty whiny in my email because I was so frustrated, but they said they knew about the problem and were working on it. And while they didn't gift me the trophy, the fact that they responded to my complaint and also were working on it was something I appreciated at the time. Unfortunately for me, months went by, and I still had not heard an update, and I still wasn't able to unlock the trophy. I finally got it on my 4th or 5th completion of the trophy requirements, even though no updates for the game had come through, so I guess I just got lucky, I'm not really sure. The reason this platinum is at number 10 is purely because I remember just how much I struggled initially, and the fact that I did it the hard way the first time and didn't get the trophy. I will never forget this game because of that experience. At number 9 is Batman Arkham Origins, which I earned back in December 2015. This game is so underrated. It's often criticized as the worst Arkham game, but frankly, I don't think there are any bad Arkham games on PS3 or PS4. They're all incredibly fun and immersive. This one I can proudly say I got completely without boosting, which is the only reason it's on the list. The single player has a semi-difficult trophy for completing I Am the Night mode, which is a permadeath hard mode, which means if you die you start over from the beginning. I failed a couple runs going for it and eventually cheesed it by sitting next to my PS3 and just immediately turning it off if I ever died. This would thankfully save my run a few times and allow me to continue from the most recent checkpoint. The true difficulty of this platinum though comes from the multiplayer. The difficulty rating for this game will not be very high on most sites that you're going to see, but generally that's because it's assumed you would boost these trophies, which honestly it's a little unfortunate that we're at a point in the trophy hunting community where we just have to assume that boosting is the default method of obtaining all online trophies. I understand it. I mean, I get that gamers don't want to dedicate weeks to a game to earn these legitimately, but I generally will not boost unless it's a last resort, and I've tried to get more strict with myself in that regard over time. I wanted to get these trophies legit, so I played the game non-stop for a couple weeks. Like a lot of online trophies, the reason some of these are so hard is because they require a good amount of both luck and skill. Skill takes hours and hours to build, and as far as luck goes, well, if you're not on the good side of the RNG gods, you could spend many more hours waiting for the conditions to line up perfectly just to give you the opportunity to exercise that skill that you spent dozens of hours building. Long story short, you just keep playing and trying until it happens. That's how most of these hard online trophies are nowadays, and it was no different here. One of these trophies was called Predator Paragon, which you get for taking down 6 enemies as a hero with 6 different takedowns in the same match. To clarify, you cannot get all 6 different takedowns on the same enemy. Each unique takedown needs to be done on a different opponent. And there are only 8 takedowns available in the game: inverted takedown, great takedown, ground takedown, standard melee, gadget takedown, silent takedown, knockout smash, and ledge takedown. So you need to get 6 of those 8 in a single match against 6 different players. Anybody who has done the Predator challenges in the Arkham games knows that doing a wide variety of takedowns in a single match, even against NPC AI enemies, is quite difficult. It requires your opponent, real or AI, to be positioned in very specific ways, and you need to be able to take advantage quickly. If your enemy never walks over a floor grate, you'll never get a great takedown. To get 6 of these in a single match took me many attempts, and I was doing it at a time when the multiplayer community in this game was not exactly flooded with players. There were probably a couple other trophies that gave me difficulty in this game, but this is the one I definitely remember the most. At number 8, I have Shadow of the Colossus, specifically the PS3 version. I earned this platinum fairly recently in October 2024. Full disclosure, I had a list of my top 10 hardest platinums made a couple months ago, and I felt pretty good about it. Shadow of the Colossus was nowhere near the top 10 at that point, but I had never actually gone for the PS3 platinum before. Shadow of the Colossus is one of those generationally great games. It was absolutely adored by those who played it on the PS2, and even though I never completed the game way back then, I was still excited for the PS3 remaster. Well, I played it for a couple hours in 2011, and for no real reason that I can remember, I just stopped playing it after the first few Colossi. I more or less forgot about the game, but always intended to go back and finish it. Since I'm actively working on finishing my PS3 backlog, I figured I would give this one a full effort attempt, and boy was it tough. I was surprised and skeptical when I saw this platinum was an 8 out of 10 difficulty, but when I got to the hard time attacks, I completely understood. The hard time attacks are the only thing that make this a difficult platinum, and it's due to the fact that your character, named Wander, gets flailed around like a goddamn rag doll anytime a Colossus shakes, which makes it very hard to stab the Colossus. The result is that you end up running out of stamina trying to hang on, and you either just fall off, or if you happen to make it to a safe spot on the Colossus, you have to climb back to the vital point and try destroying it again. It made for a very frustrating experience. The second thing that kind of makes this platinum difficult is the very strict timelines in these hard time attacks. For a couple of these Colossi, you have to be basically perfect in order to get the Colossus in position, mount it, climb it, reach the vital points, and destroy them in time without getting shaken off. In most cases, you fall off once and it's an instant restart. The rest of this platinum is really grindy. I had to beat the game like 6.5 times, which after you beat the game and the time attacks and you unlock some of the powerful weapons and items, isn't too bad, and you can clear the game in just a few hours, but it's definitely got some grind to it. Thankfully, the PS4 version of the game, which I also platinumed shortly after, saw some difficulty reductions and some grind reductions, and I highly recommend anybody who has not played this game to play the PS4 version. But keep in mind that this started off as a PS2 game that was remastered to PS3 and then was actually remade from the ground up to PS4 with some very clear improvements, but at the end of the day, it's still largely based on a PS2 era game, so it still does have some jank to it, unfortunately. At number 7, I have Madden 15, which is a platinum I've actually obtained twice, once on PS3 in October 2016, and again on PS4 in March 2017, which was actually my 100th platinum. Both of these are some of the rarest Madden platinums out there, even to this day. When you look at this game's trophy list, it doesn't seem too bad on the surface, and I'm sure you're wondering why specifically I have the 2015 iteration on this list. This platinum is only difficult for one reason. and that's Madden Ultimate Team. Madden Ultimate Team, or MUT, is a game mode that was introduced to Madden in the early 2010s and has you building a custom team using player cards. You can either earn or buy MUT coins and use them to buy new players, and then you face off against other players and the teams that they have created in a shortened season-type format culminating in playoffs and a Super Bowl. It's absolutely pay to win. EA has been pulling this shit for years, but I refuse to pay for coins just to make a better team. Madden 15 requires you to reach a Super Bowl in Madden Ultimate Team. It takes a lot of time or money to build a good team in MUT.
Good players cost more coins,
or they just have incredibly low drop rates. So a good team takes a long time to build if you're not buying coins. It seemed like every time I would make it into the playoffs in a MUT season, I would be faced up against some opponent who had a team filled with legendary players, all Hall of Famers. These teams are almost impossible to beat unless you're some god at Madden, which I'm certainly not. Or you have to have a legendary team yourself. I did have some good players on my team after, a few weeks of playing, but I definitely was not going to be able to compete against teams filled with Hall of Fame players. I spent weeks on this trophy because I kept making it to the playoffs and running into one of these teams, and it was so defeating because the only way to get a team this good is to either put an insane amount of hours into MUT or purchase the coins. And frankly, I was not willing to spend money just to get this platinum, so I just kept playing, kept trying, kept building my team, and eventually I was able to string some W's together and get the trophies completed. At number 6 is Call of Duty World at War, which I earned earlier this year in April. This is going to be a short entry because everybody instantly knows exactly why this game is on a hardest platinums list. Grenade spamming in this game is the stuff of legend, and it's almost comical how ridiculous it is. There are parts of this game where you're required to advance towards infinitely spawning enemies who have laser-like precision and can kill you in a couple hits, and anytime you sit around for more than a second, you'll be absolutely bombarded by grenades from every angle. The grenade spamming single-handedly takes this platinum from probably a 5 or a 6 difficulty to something closer to an 8, making it a very frustrating experience. All that said, this was a very fun COD to play. I love the older Call of Duty campaigns that felt more grounded and realistic, and World at War was also the first game to introduce the Zombies game mode into the franchise, so it definitely deserves a spot in the COD Hall of Fame. At number 5 is Call of Duty Black Ops 3, which I earned in October 2023. Yes, you heard me correctly, 2 Call of Duty games back to back. I know I need to get good and play some harder games. I'm working on it. Now, full disclaimer, I did use the God mode invincibility glitch for the combat simulator to make that portion of the platinum virtually effortless, and yet I still have this in my top 10 hardest platinums because this game is just very hard and grindy in so many different ways. For starters, you have to beat the game on realistic, and I must say that this is definitely one of the hardest Call of Duty campaigns I've completed on its hardest difficulty, and I have quite a few Call of Duty platinums. I played it solo, and you die very quickly in 1 to 2 hits at most, and there are multiple areas in the game with infinitely spawning enemies, so you're kind of forced to move up while you're getting shot at non-stop, and again, you're dying in 1 to 2 hits. There are parts of this game that literally took me days just to get through on realistic. But this only scratches the surface of what is needed for this platinum. Just take a look at some of the things that are required to get the Personal Decorator trophy, which is one of the most notorious and infamous difficult trophies in the entire Call of Duty franchise. Earn all campaign weapons, attachments, and camos. This takes about 18,000 kills in total. Fully upgrade all cyber cores. Unlock and purchase all weapons, lethals, tacticals, and cyber combat abilities. Complete the campaign on veteran difficulty. Each mission also needs to be beaten on veteran without restarting a single checkpoint. Historically, Veteran is the hardest difficulty in most Call of Duty games, so this is certainly not an easy feat. Complete the campaign on the realistic difficulty setting. This difficulty is much harder. You will die in 1 to 2 hits. Locate all the collectibles in the campaign. Thankfully, there's only 56. Complete all accolades for all missions. There are 176 total accolades in the game, and they're basically miscellaneous challenges. Each mission has like 15, I think. You can track them via the pause menu to keep track of which ones you earned and which ones you still need. Many of them are pretty easy, but some of them are just downright frustrating. And unfortunately, some of them you can only do in certain parts of the mission, and so if you miss it, sometimes you have to restart the mission and try it again. Complete all campaign challenges. There are 33 unique campaign challenges. Some of these challenges will come naturally, but others will probably require a significant amount of intentional playtime, playing in a very specific way or using specific weapons or abilities. One very specific challenge, which will make or break the platinum for most people, unless of course you cheese it like I did, and that's for completing combat immersion on realistic. Combat immersion is a wave-based mode where enemies get tougher as the rounds go on, and you're playing on realistic, which is already very hard. It's very easy to die on realistic. I'm a little bit ashamed that I took the easy way out to get this, by using the God mode invincibility glitch, but frankly, after everything else I had done for this platinum, I was just honestly ready to be done with it. The silver lining for this platinum is that you can actually play the campaign in co-op, which certainly does make things easier, but the stupid part is that your online and offline campaign save files are completely separate. So you can't start playing the game solo on your offline profile and decide you want to finish it up in co-op on your online profile. When I actually beat the game on realistic, I either didn't have PS Plus or maybe I didn't even have internet at the time. So I beat it offline, and then I was really annoyed when I realized that I had to do the rest of the campaign trophies offline. So all of those challenges, all of those accolades, I had to do those all offline solo as well, or I had to restart and redo the campaign on realistic on my online profile, and I just didn't want to complete the game again on realistic, so I just stuck with my offline profile. Honestly, I thought that was a really dumb design choice by the developers to kind of separate those into separate save files, but whatever. At number 4 is Killzone 2. I earned this platinum all the way back in March 2011. Long before the Horizon series existed, Killzone was the series that put Guerrilla Games on the map. Man, I spent so much time playing this game my freshman year of college back in 2009, to the point where I was often skipping class just to play it. I wasn't a die-hard trophy hunter at this point. It was something that I was just starting to get into. I had gotten my first trophy in the game in August 2009, but didn't end up getting the platinum for another 2 years, and there's 2 very specific reasons why. Beating this game on elite difficulty was really challenging because for a PS3 game in 2009, this game had a really smart enemy AI that would flank you, and even though you have an AI teammate in most levels, they were borderline useless on the harder difficulties. I'm sure there were multiple spots where I struggled to finish the game on elite, but the ending specifically was a nightmare and I'll never forget it. Near the end of the game, you're in this giant room up on a balcony. To your left and to your right are paths that lead to stairs, and those stairs lead to a lower level of the arena. Enemies will start to flood this room, and eventually, given enough time, they will start to go up those stairs and flank you from both sides if you don't kill them fast enough. So you need to be aggressive and precise to kill them, and they're kind of far away too. But you also have to be careful so as not to die. I remember struggling so much on this and feeling hopeless so many times, but eventually after enough attempts I finally got it. It felt so satisfying to finally kill Radic on elite difficulty. It was so challenging, and at that point it was definitely one of the hardest things I had done in games. The second thing that makes this such a difficult platinum is the trophy Valor Grand Cross, which requires you to achieve weekly online honor rank number 4. What does that mean? You need to be in the top 1% of all online players for the week in order to earn this trophy. I got this trophy in 2011, over 2 years after release. By that point, the active player base was substantially smaller than it once was. So in order to get this trophy, I had to be in the top 1% of likely just a few thousand players. If you're following along with the math, the top 1% of 1,000 players would mean that I'd have to be in the top 10 best players in the world for a 1-week span. Now, I don't know the exact numbers for player base for that time period, but nevertheless, you had to play the game a lot and at a high level for a week straight to even have a chance at this. But I was just playing it nonstop, from the time I woke up to the time I went to bed. And I was also really familiar with the maps and the weapons and the classes, and truthfully, I was spawn sniping as much as I could. On some of these maps, it was pretty easy to spawn camp. Is that cheap? Maybe. But I didn't care. I just wanted the damn trophy. So, to this day, Killzone 2 remains one of my fondest gaming memories due to just how much time I spent playing it, how much fun I had playing it, and definitely one of my proudest platinums just because of how difficult it was. At number 3 is Max Payne 3, which I earned very recently in October 2024. This game is so damn good. At some point in the last few months, I just decided I was going to commit to this one for platinum number 275, and I did. And it was great. It's a great game. Rockstar is known for a couple things: making absolute bangers and giving those bangers trophy lists that are grindy as shit. Max Payne 3 was no exception, except it added a couple trophies that are significantly harder than probably any other trophies I've earned in a Rockstar game, and I have a lot of Rockstar Platinums. In my brilliant foresight, I knocked out all the multiplayer trophies for this game and its DLCs well before servers closed in 2021, so the only things I had left to clean up in 2024 were some miscellaneous single-player trophies, collectibles, grinds, New York Minute mode, and the dreaded New York Minute Hardcore mode. This has got to be the hardest trophy Rockstar ever put in a game. If you know of one harder than this, you gotta let me know in the comments, but this is certainly near the top of the list. New York Minute Hardcore requires you to beat the whole game in one sitting without dying under a time limit. You start the game from Chapter 1 with 1 minute on the clock, and you gain time as you kill enemies. You get more time for special kills like headshots and explosive kills or melee kills. A standard kill gives you 5 seconds, a headshot 6 seconds, and melee kills, explosive kills, those both give you 10 seconds. So there's a benefit to kind of getting special kills, especially early on in the run. Fortunately, by the time you're good enough to beat this mode, the time limit doesn't really become an issue. When I finished my final run, I had about 12 minutes on the clock, which is actually really low compared to some of the other runs I've seen where people have 30 minutes left on the clock. So time is typically not your biggest issue here. That said, I did fail this mode 9 times, and failure number 7 was because I ran out of time right before the final boss, which was so demoralizing. I was literally like just a couple minutes away from the final boss and I would have had it completed. But even though time is typically not the hard part about this, you still need to be moving quickly through the levels, and you need to be precise. You need to know where the painkillers are, and you need to know where the enemy spawns are. You pretty much have no chance without memorizing where the painkillers and enemy spawns are, because you need to know both in order to speed through these levels quickly. And you also need to be able to hit headshots at a decent rate in order to both stay alive and to be continuously adding time for yourself. Even though this platinum is no longer attainable, I would challenge anybody to add this trophy to their collection because it is that perfect diabolical mix of being hard, time-consuming, and requiring, honestly, true mastery of the game in order to complete. This game has a lot of unskippable cutscenes, especially near the beginning of the game. So each failed run forces you to sit through multiple long cutscenes once again, which adds another level of frustration to the entire process. It's like Rockstar is kind of rubbing it in your face that you failed once again. There's also a lot of parts in this game where you can fail a run instantly, such as quick time events, accidentally killing a friendly NPC or allowing them to get killed, or simply not progressing through a section fast enough. All it takes is one split second of bad aim or pressing the wrong button during a quick time event, and your run is over, 3 hours down the drain. If you are interested, you can see my full New York Minute hardcore run here. One thing to be aware of is that this game is notoriously buggy and glitchy and is prone to crashing. And while I did not have any of these experiences going specifically for this trophy, I did run into bugs while playing this game, including some crashes, and I definitely heard plenty of horror stories from other people who attempted this trophy 50 plus times and having their game crash dozens of times, while trying to beat this. So, tremendous game, very hard platinum. At number 2 is Injustice on PS4. I also got this platinum very recently in August 2024, and before I committed to it, I really had no plans to go back and platinum this game anytime soon. I've been focusing heavily on my backlog over the past couple years, but I also wanted to start going for some notoriously difficult platinums. And so I was browsing through my list and asked myself, why don't I try and finish Injustice? I had a good chunk of the trophies already done and only had 12 left, but of course I still needed to get all 720 stars in the Star Lab missions, and I also had to complete battle mode. These two things are really what make this platinum so brutal, and are the reason I really didn't think I would ever get this platinum. For starters, I suck at fighting games. I don't play them very often, and I especially hate harder versions of these games where you have to learn insanely long combos just to stand a chance, or the enemy AI will just destroy you with input reads into a massive combo that just obliterates your health. And believe me, even after practicing this game for many, many hours, this still happened to me a lot. The Ultimate Battler trophy requires you to beat 20 different modes within battle mode. These modes each have a unique difficulty modifier, such as beat 8 random opponents, or beat 8 opponents with only half health. 2 of these modes in particular are really what make or break the platinum for most players. I of course use Solomon Grundy since he has a high damage combo that's pretty well known and isn't too difficult to memorize or execute, which can take about a third of the enemy's health bar in a single go, so it's super useful when going for some of these harder trophies. However, as anybody who has gone for this trophy and beaten battle mode will tell you, connecting the combo sometimes is really difficult, especially against certain enemies. The mode called Impossible requires you to beat all characters with 1 health bar. Let me say that again. This mode requires you to beat all 24 characters with 1 health bar, and the enemies get harder as you go up the list. Now, you can gain back some health between each match by doing certain things within a match, such as level transitions or dealing a certain amount of damage in one combo, but this gets more and more difficult as you progress, since the enemies get harder the higher up the ladder you go. By the time you reach the end, your opponents become very difficult and you will likely only have a fraction of your health remaining. I think I managed to get up to like opponent 19 in one of my very early attempts, but I struggled real heavily on this trophy for a couple days. After that initial run where I made it to 19, I was struggling bad. Like some runs I wasn't even making it past opponent 10. But I just stuck with it, and it's just a matter of time with a lot of these things. You practice enough, you get the combo timing down, and eventually you can get it done. The second battle mode that makes or breaks the platinum for most people is called the Max, which is for beating 10 characters on the hardest difficulty. Similar to Impossible, if you fail once, you have to start over. I think my first attempt, I made it to like opponent 6, and so I was feeling pretty confident. I thought, this isn't really that bad, but I ended up struggling very heavily over the next couple days. There were many attempts where I lost on the very first opponent, and like I would hardly get any hits in. The enemies just put you in these very punishing combos, and you know, they take out a huge chunk of your health, which is exactly what I was trying to do to them, but I was failing really badly. They would also read your button inputs and adapt very quickly to whatever cheese method you thought you discovered. And so even with the Solomon Grundy cheap combo, you know, that's easy to use, you can't just spam it over and over again, because eventually the opponent will just start blocking it. You have to kind of throw in some unique attacks from time to time, or the enemy will just block everything and make you pay for it. There was a couple day period where I legitimately thought this was impossible for me to get. I figured, I'm in my 30s. My reaction time is not what it used to be. I might just have to accept the fact that I can't do this. I can't beat these hard AI enemies. You know, I remember specifically trying to get it all night long one Saturday. I was up till very early in the morning the following day, and I was just failing miserably, and I just felt so demoralized and hopeless. But by some miracle, the next day, I got it on my first attempt. So, you know, maybe I just needed a break. During that full day of grinding on that Saturday, my hands were getting so sweaty because I was so anxious, especially as you move up the ladder. When you're going for the 24 opponents back to back, it takes 40 to 45 minutes to get through all of them. So if you fail near the end, that's 45 minutes wasted. I also actually ended up breaking the D-pad on one of my DualSense controllers by accident playing this game. With all the repetitions of the same Solomon Grundy combo that I had to do in order to beat this, my down and right D-pad buttons eventually just stuck together. So now when I press either one, it presses both of them. So that I basically ruined a controller going for this platinum. The Star Labs missions are the other thing that make this platinum really grindy and also pretty tough. A lot of them are pretty easy and you can knock them out pretty quickly, but there are some that are quite difficult. Thankfully, you can find a lot of tips online for most of these challenges. There are some that honestly just boil down to luck, but if you just keep trying them enough times, eventually things will fall in your favor. That's not to say that it's all luck, though. You definitely need to master parts of this game in order to complete some of these. And the last thing you need to do for the platinum is to grind XP to level 100. This is an absolutely ridiculous grind. This took me about a week of grinding XP AFK after I had already gotten all the other trophies in the game in order to reach level 100. I actually bought a turbo controller solely for this trophy. NetherRealms is notorious for having long and grindy and also difficult platinums, and Injustice was certainly no exception. And finally, at number 1, I have to put The Elder Scrolls Online, which I earned in December 2021. Where do I even start with this game? Wow. This is a game that I originally didn't care for when I first played it in 2015, but I came back to it around 2020 and absolutely fell in love with it. I played it a lot during COVID, even though I probably would have been playing it anyway, even if we didn't have a pandemic. There's a few reasons why I have to put this at number 1, even though in terms of actual true difficulty, this might not be the hardest platinum out there, but this platinum took me 800 hours. 800 hours. And that number has actually grown to closer to 1,800 hours today because I still enjoy the game. I still play it. And there's a constant stream of new updates and new trophies that come out every few months. And so it's still a very active game, still a very fun game. If you're into MMOs, I absolutely recommend that you try it out. Most of the 800 hours I spent going for this platinum were just spent playing the game and working through the grindy parts of the game, and there's a lot of grindy bits in this game. Here's a list of just some of the things that are needed to get the platinum. Each of these grinds is done across all the zones, so each zone has a set number of each one of these. You have to complete approximately 800 different quests. Now this is spread out between the main quest line, and then each zone has a bunch of zone quests. And then you have things like the Fighters Guild quests, the Mages Guild quests, a lot of different quests through a lot of different groups. And in total, just to get the platinum, you're looking at close to 800 different quests. You have to complete 117 delves. It's generally not a good idea to compare this game to Skyrim because they're two completely different types of games, but the closest thing would be like the Skyrim dungeons. There's basically a area to explore. There's usually a boss at the end, and those bosses are pretty easy. You can probably defeat most or all of them solo. You have to complete 86 public dungeons, which basically they're a little tougher. Sometimes the bosses require multiple people to activate a puzzle, or some where you need to step on multiple platforms at once. There's ways to cheese some of these with a companion, but typically these are easier done with a group, but they're not too hard. Then you have 15 group dungeons, which were probably tough at one point, but now if you're just talking about the 15 base game dungeons, they're pretty easy, but they typically require 4 players. So you can queue up for them specifically, or you can get them through a random dungeon. Randoms that you're going to be grouped up with should be able to get through these 15 dungeons no problem. You'll need to destroy 55 dark anchors, and dark anchors are world events, so depending on what zone you're in, sometimes there's dozens of players at these dark anchors. It's basically a wave-based mode. It's a few waves of enemies, fairly easy enemies, and then there's a boss at the end. So you need to do 55 of these for this specific trophy, but you're going to need to destroy a lot more than that in order to destroy all of Molag Bol's generals. That is pretty grindy. That took me, I think, over 200 dark anchors. You also need to collect 319 sky shards across all the zones. They're not super hard to find. You can find a map online, and through a recent update, and I say recent as in the last couple years, they added a thing where if you get close enough to one, it'll show up on your map, and I think it'll stay there even if you leave. So, but there's 319 of them. You have to collect 207 rare fish across the different zones. This doesn't sound too bad, but truthfully, spawn rates for the rare fish is pretty low unless you play the game enough in order to unlock some of the stat increases. So there are meals that you can eat that increase your chance of catching a rare fish, but you have to fish to find the recipe for that food. There are skills that you can purchase with champion points to increase your rare fish drop rate or to improve your fishing, but it takes a lot of playtime in order to reach that level that's needed. And there's also a companion that you can use to increase your fishing. You can also increase your chance of a rare fish by fishing with other people. So the bigger your group that you're fishing with, there's a stat boost to all of you in your party, but the fishing hole has a finite number of fish in it, so it will drain faster with more people, of course. Long story short, you have to play the game for a long time in order to get this. If you're going to go for it without the stat boost, it's going to take you a lot longer, obviously. So your best bet is to wait until way late in the game when you have enough champion points to purchase these skills. This trophy really wasn't that bad for me personally. Unfortunately, it is a bronze, and it's still incredibly rare. It's in my top 5 rarest trophies, and it's the only bronze in my top 5 rarest. So it's very tedious, but if you wait until you've done a lot of the other trophies first, it's not too bad. And the last big thing that you need to do for this platinum is become Emperor of Cyrodiil. Now, what does that mean? Cyrodiil is the PvP zone, that's player versus player. It's the PvP zone in the Elder Scrolls Online. If you've ever played any other Elder Scrolls game, I'm sure you've heard of Cyrodiil. Becoming the Emperor in Cyrodiil is truly a daunting task when you find out exactly what you need to do in order to become the Emperor. The Emperor Trophy is still to this day probably my proudest gaming achievement, and not necessarily only because it was difficult, but for multiple reasons. If you've ever watched a top hardest platinums video in the last 10 years, there's a good chance that this game is on it, and the Emperor Trophy is the reason. To get this trophy, you need to become Emperor in a Cyrodiil campaign. Becoming Emperor requires a tremendous amount of time and commitment, and in order to fully appreciate what this trophy entails, first I need to explain a little bit how the PvP works in this game. When you first start playing ESO, you join one of 3 alliances during the character creation screen. And your goal in a Cyrodiil campaign is for your alliance to win the alliance war. Your alliance gains points based on how many resources and keeps your alliance has control of at that time. And these are constantly changing throughout the campaign as players log in and out, and different points of the map become strategic battlefronts as an alliance tries to press one of the other 2 alliances and take over more of their territory. Cyrodiil feels like 3D chess, where 3 alliances of players are constantly battling for strategic resources and keeps on the map. You're fighting players from one alliance on the left and players from another alliance on the right, and those 2 alliances are also fighting against you and one another. You can gain individual alliance points or AP in Cyrodiil by doing various things that help your alliance move up the leaderboards, capturing resources against enemy AIs, killing other players, healing friendly players, repairing friendly structures, or participating in small or massive skirmishes. All these things give you varying amounts of AP. You'll get a lot more AP if you're involved in a huge battle that takes 30 minutes, and you'll get just a small amount of AP if you and 4 teammates gang up on one enemy player and kill them. To become Emperor, your alliance must take all 6 central keeps, and you must be at the top of the leaderboard for your alliance in alliance points when that happens. The Emperor is extremely powerful. You get a bunch of additional skills that give you a bunch of massive buffs. You become really overpowered. So having the Emperor in your alliance is a huge advantage in the alliance war. So all 3 sides are constantly fighting for it, and when somebody gets it, they don't want to give it up. You also get a cool permanent in-game title and outfit, which is why I think a lot of people even care about this achievement, at least a lot of ESO players. Most ESO players aren't doing it for the trophy, they're doing it for the in-game title, the in-game outfits, or they're doing it because they want to win the alliance war. It takes an insane amount of time to rack up enough points to reach the top and keep your top position at the leaderboards. Some of the people who play this game are really good, obviously, because this is the only game that they play. And other people, like trophy hunters, of course, but other people who want this in-game achievement, they will spend all day and night playing the game in order to get it. I've heard people say that this can be easily done during the annual White Strakes Mayhem event, which is basically a PvP-focused event where you get extra AP, but truthfully, everybody else is getting extra AP as well. And there are some cases where people will boost this. If you have a group that is just farming this, sometimes they charge you for it. They'll say, give our guild 1 million gold and we'll get you Emperor. So there are some players that do that. There are some other groups that will just do it out of the kindness of their hearts, but I'm calling bullshit on this as an actual strategy to get the trophy, because I think that's just extremely luck-based unless you know a lot of players who are already playing this game. The first time I attempted this, I did it in an under 50 campaign, which is generally what's recommended because everybody's weaker. I played non-stop for days and I failed miserably. And at this point, I probably put dozens, if not hundreds of hours into the game. I was nowhere near ready to go for Emperor. I didn't know the PvP mechanics well enough. I didn't have gear that was good enough. So I just fell back and worked on some of the other easier trophies, the grindy trophies. And in the meantime, I was just building my character, getting more skills, unlocking better gear, perfecting my build, looking up tips online, and just becoming more and more familiar with the game. Not just ESO, but especially the PvP mode and, how different armor sets work, and basically building myself up the best that I could before I went for this a second time, because I wanted my second attempt to really count. My second attempt was in December 2021. I'm pretty sure it was on the back end of a long Thanksgiving vacation, so I knew I had some time off of work, which I didn't mention it, but you're going to have to plan some time to commit for this. I think I had like 3 or 4 days off of work, and then it was going into a weekend. So basically I started playing on a Tuesday night. I played until the following Sunday afternoon before I finally got the trophy. And in that span, that 5.5 day span, I put in 77.5 hours. So that's averaging just under 13 hours a day. When I add in breaks and meals and showers and the occasional just short break from the game, I was getting very little sleep. I was basically playing it from the time I woke up to the time I went to bed, and even when I was asleep, I was dreaming about it. It was miserable, honestly. That's the best way that I can explain it. It's not something I would recommend anybody else do, and I think it went beyond the point of being fun. Even for the most diehard trophy hunters, I can't recommend at least doing it the way that I did it. I mean, if you have some friends who play this and you're willing to work together and boost one another towards it, that probably makes it a lot more enjoyable. But I just remember when I popped that trophy and I just let out a yell of relief, because I knew I could rest. I knew it was over, and I knew that finally I had earned a trophy that was notoriously difficult. By all accounts, this is one of the hardest trophies that you can obtain on the PlayStation. To me, this trophy was the ultimate test in endurance. Truthfully, there's nothing that requires a ton of skill with Emperor. It just requires a ton of time. You have to be willing to put in a lot of time in a relatively short amount of time to have a chance at this. So you're going to have to probably go a couple days with very little sleep. You're going to have to play the game nonstop from sunrise to sunset. It goes back to in the beginning of the video when I said typically I don't equate time commitment with difficulty. This is an exception, because you have to put in a lot of time in a short amount of time. Now, I know I went on talking about this game for a long time, but it's hard to explain just how grindy and tough it is without giving all of those contextual details. There's a lot that goes into it. And this game also took up a large part of my life, both as I was going for the platinum and as I just continued to play it for another 1,000 hours at least after earning the platinum. And it's now one of my most played games of all time. It's a game I genuinely love now, and I'm glad I got to experience it in all of its painful glory. So those are my top 10 hardest platinums so far. I plan on adding quite a few entries to this list in the next year or two. Since I completed Injustice and Max Payne 3 over the last couple months, it's reassured me that I'm capable of beating some harder games if I practice enough. And the feeling that I got from getting those platinums was amazing. Now, my biggest priority over the last couple years as a gamer has been working on my PS3 backlog. I've made a lot of good progress on that. I'm starting to narrow down that list pretty good, and I plan on continuing to work on that, but I'm also going to be starting to add in some very difficult platinums. Some of those games that everybody knows about that are always on the hardest platinums lists, I'm going to make a serious effort to go for as many of those as I possibly can, including even the one above all others.